Hello viewers, this is Chandita and in this video I'm going to show you how to add filters into a dashboard which has table calculations in it, and when the table calculations look up to previous values for calculating the data. To show you exactly what I mean, here is a dashboard which has the sample superstore data, and I have two columns, the order date which is listed in quarters and the moving average of cells which goes back to the previous 3 quarters to calculate the moving average. Now there could be a requirement where I want to see this data but only for a date range. I don't want to see this entire list. So for that I have these two filters. Now, when I start filtering the data, and before that, let's kind of see what the value for Q4 2010 is before filtering. So it is 481083. Now, suppose I start filtering the data. So I have removed Q1 2010. But if I now see the value for 2010 Q4, it is 502818. So the value changed. This is not what I expected. I wanted the value to be intact, just that I wanted to see the data for a specific date range. Let's move to another dashboard and see how it should have actually worked. So this dashboard, if you see, it's almost like a replica of the previous dashboard. But here, if you see, and it has also removed the Q1 2010, but the value for 2010 Q4 is still 481083. Let's kind of filter the data a little bit more. If you see, here also when I'm filtering, the value remains intact. It is still 481083. One more, still 481083. So here in this dashboard, the value doesn't change even if I'm filtering the dates. While in this dashboard, the value changes. Now it's 698982 when I'm starting to filter the dashboard on the date. So now let's see how to create the date filters so that the underlying data does not change. Now before even looking at how to create the date filters, let's try to understand Tableau's table calculations and Tableau's order of filtering a little bit more. Now, Tableau's table calculations work on the data which is rendered to the dashboard after all the dimension filters and the measure filters have been applied to the data source. If I have to go back to the dashboard which was filtering the data from the dashboard itself, here I have a simple date filter which filters the date based on the parameters applied. Now, when this filter is applied to the dashboard, it sends a query to the data source itself, and the data which is rendered to the dashboard is already filtered for the date range specified by the parameters. So when I look at the 2010 Q4 date and want to calculate the moving average of cells by looking at the last 3 quarters, the data for the last 3 quarters is not available to the dashboard itself because it has been filtered by the parameters which are applied at the data source level. If I have to go back and see Tableau's order of filtering, table calculations, if you see, work after the dimensions and measure filters have taken place. So, if I want to have the moving average of cells calculated correctly, taking into consideration all the filtered order dates, but still don't want to show the order dates for all the quarters, I need to have a mechanism to kind of have the filter applied, but at the same time the calculation for the moving average intact. So for that, my only remedy is table calculation filters which work after the table calculations have taken place. Now, with that idea, let's see how to create such a table calculation filter. On a new sheet, let me create the viz from scratch. For that, let me drag the order date columns and let me change it to quarters. Let me also drag the sum of cells to rows and change it to a moving average. Let me go back to the table calculation and let me make it perhaps, it should look at the previous three values. I'll change it to a cross tab because it's going to be easier to see the values exactly. Now I will create the date parameter filters. So let me put the name as a start date, change it to a data type of date. Let me make the larval values as a range. I'll set the range from the order date, change the step size to be quarters, and let the display format also be quarter. Okay, I'm good. I'll just duplicate it and create the end date. Just rename it to end date, and I'll show both the parameters. Okay, so I have both the parameters for my date filter set. Now if you see, it did not do anything when I changed the parameter because I'm not linked these parameters to my viz yet, which I'm going to do in a moment. But before that, I want to show you or tell you what I'm going to do. So I am going to create a lookup calculation which is going to look at the dates in all these rows and compare it with the start date. So what I mean is, suppose I change the start date to 210 Q3. So it's going to compare the start date with the date in all these rows and going to give me the difference in the number of quarters. So if you see, the difference between 2010 Q3 as a start date and 2010 Q3 in row 3 is 0. If I move ahead, the difference between 2010 Q3 and my 2010 Q4 is just 1 quarter. But if I go back to 2010 Q2, the difference between 2010 Q3 to 2010 Q2 is a negative 1 quarter. So I'm going to create a diff calculation which is going to subtract the start date and the date in every row, and it's going to give me only those rows which have a value greater than equal to 0, essentially filtering all the quarters which are lesser than my start date. So let me create that calculation. Let me name it date filter. So I'll have a diff function. The date part in this case will be quarter because I'm looking at quarters here. Start date will be nothing but my start date parameter, and the end date here will be a lookup value which will be looking up the dates in all the rows. So let me create that lookup. The order date comma 0. Here the offset is 0 because I want to look up the value in that row itself and I don't want to go back and forth. So that's that. We're getting an error. Okay, so lookups you need to have an aggregated data for the lookup, so I'll just add max to it. Doesn't matter what you add, but you need to have an aggregation in this case. So I'm still getting an error. I guess I'm good, but I guess I have not applied the zero correctly. Now my calculation is good. So it is taking the max of the order date for that specific row, because I've set an offset of 0. It's going to calculate the difference between the start date in terms of quarters. Let me apply. Okay, let me drag the date filter and let me go to at least and change it to 0. So the value has to be at least 0 and above. Once I do that, if I see my filter for the start date is already applied, and if I start filtering a little more, if you see, though I'm filtering, my values are not changing, they're intact. Now you can do the same with the end date, but here I'm not looking forward to the dates, I'm just looking backwards to the previous 3 dates. So I'm not done the same with the end date, but you can use the same calculation for the end date as well if you want to retain the underlying dashboard values as well as to hide the quarters which you do not want to see. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching.